The claim driving the news cycle right now is that the US government is suddenly dropping a heavy hand on artificial intelligence. They're supposedly slapping strict export controls and vetting requirements on frontier models, like Anthropic's Mythos and OpenAI's GPT 5.6, right as OpenAI gears up for a $1 trillion IPO.
Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dig into the actual underlying mechanics of this AI boom.
Look, if you've been around the block a few times, maybe you lived through the dot-com boom, the mobile shift, or the early crypto wars like I did, you know the breathless coverage usually misses how the machine actually works. So let's step back and look at the pattern here. The sheer speed of this government intervention tells us a lot. On June 2nd, the Trump administration signed an executive order establishing a supposedly voluntary 30-day review period for advanced AI models. Okay, fair enough. But a week later, on June 9th, Anthropic launched Fable 5. 3 days after that, the government issued an export control directive so broad that Anthropic was literally handed a 90-minute window to shut the model down globally. Then, jump to late June, and we see OpenAI getting a much softer landing. They rolled out GPT 5.6, but only as a preview to a tightly vetted list of government-approved partners.
But here's the complication that all the headlines are missing. The government is trying to use traditional export controls, a framework built for physical goods, from munitions, to regulate cloud-based APIs. As an analysis by Tech Policy Press points out, the model weights of these AI systems never actually leave US servers. What crosses the border is just access to a capability. We saw this exact same regulatory friction back in the 1990s during the crypto wars, when the government tried to classify encryption software as a weapon. It's a really messy legal stretch, so you have to look past the headlines and ask yourself, who actually benefits from all this friction?
Well, a report from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, lays it out pretty clearly. While this looks like a crackdown to the casual observer, it's actually creating a massive regulatory moat. By setting up this gated, vetted preview process, the government is effectively turning these AI incumbents into privileged defense contractors. The red tape that looks like a fatal burden to a scrappy startup is, in reality, a formidable barrier to entry. It's a state-sponsored wall protecting established giants like OpenAI from newer competition.
And honestly, OpenAI needs all the protection it can get right now, because their core business model has a severe structural vulnerability. This is where we need to shift our focus from Washington over to Wall Street. You see, every large-scale software company that earned a premium valuation over the last 20 years shared one core economic truth: zero marginal cost per user. Think about it. When WhatsApp added 100 million users, it cost them practically nothing in new infrastructure. But AI economics just don't work like that. Every single query you type into ChatGPT incurs a proportional GPU inference cost. These compute costs scale linearly with usage, meaning the more successful your product is, the more server racks, power grids, and cooling systems you need just to keep the lights on.
Let's break down the actual numbers pulled from Indie Money's analysis of OpenAI's confidential S1 filing. Yes, the revenue growth is staggering. We're talking a $25 billion annualized run rate by February 2026. But consider the projected inference cost for 2026. It's sitting at a whopping $14.1 billion. That massive compute burden is actively dragging their gross margin down to 33% in 2025. Now, why does that 33% matter so much? Because healthy software margins usually sit north of 70 or 80%. When you're valued like a software company, investors expect software margins. A 33% gross margin looks a lot more like a heavy industry manufacturing business or a low-margin cloud hosting service. If every new dollar of revenue costs you 67 cents in pure compute power, you just can't grow your way out of the problem by adding more users.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room: $665 billion. According to reporting from The Information, cited in that same Indie Money analysis, this is OpenAI's projected cumulative cash burn between 2026 and 2030. OpenAI is targeting a $1 trillion IPO valuation, but that valuation is essentially a massive, highly leveraged bet that hardware efficiency will miraculously improve and compute costs will fall off a cliff before that $665 billion cash burn drains their reserves completely. It's a capital-intensive infrastructure play. It reminds me a lot of the telecom builds of the late 90s, where companies laid billions of dollars of dark fiber, hoping the demand would eventually catch up. Make no mistake, this is heavy infrastructure disguised as a nimble software startup. And they're making that bet while the ground is shifting right underneath them. The prevailing narrative out of Silicon Valley has always been that bigger models are better, requiring increasingly massive data centers. But consider the performance gap we're seeing right now with smaller models. Liquid AI, an MIT spinout, just released a tiny edge model with only 230 million parameters. On specific data extraction tasks, it is vastly outperforming models from Alibaba and Google that are 4 times its size. And the kicker? It does this running locally on a smartphone or a Raspberry Pi, completely bypassing those server-crushing GPU inference costs entirely. That bigger is better moat might be a whole lot shallower than the incumbents think.
So, as we cut through the daily noise of national security bans and trillion-dollar hype, here is the grounded takeaway. Whether you're tracking this industry for your own portfolio, analyzing competitors, or just trying to understand the future of tech, you need to know where to actually look. When OpenAI's public S1 filing finally drops, don't get distracted by the headline revenue numbers. Ignore the user counts and tune out the latest regulatory drama out of Washington. Those are just distractions.
Watch the gross margin line item. If it's stuck at 33%, or worse, if it's still declining, then that trillion-dollar valuation becomes a very difficult conversation to justify to public market investors. If the margin is improving, well, then their bet on hardware efficiency might just be paying off. But that is the only pattern that matters right now. Because if AI turns out to be just another low-margin, capital-heavy utility, you have to wonder, is the trillion-dollar prize really going to the software builders, or is it just going to the hardware companies selling the shovels?
Stay smart, stay informed.